The Evolution of Human Existence, Part 3. The Marriage Institution. This is the recital of the early beginnings of the institution of marriage. It has progressed steadily from the loose and promiscuous matings of the herd through many variations and adaptations, even to the appearance of those marriage standards which eventually culminated in the realization of pair matings, the union of one man and one woman to establish a home to the highest social order. Marriage has been many times in jeopardy, and the marriage mores have drawn heavily on both property and religion for support. But the real influence which forever safeguards marriage as the resultant family is the simple and innate biological fact that men and women possibly will not live without each other, be they the most primitive savages or the most cultured mortals. It is because of the sex urge that selfish man is lured into making something better than an animal out of himself. The self-regarding and self-gratifying sex relationship entails the certain consequences of self-denial and ensures the assumptions of altruistic duties and numerous race benefits home responsibilities. Herein has sex been recognized an unsuspected civilizer of the savage. For this same-sex impulse automatically and erringly compels man to think and eventually leads him to love. Marriage is societal institution. Marriage is society's mechanism designed to regulate, control those many human relations which arise of the physical fact of bisexuality. As such as institution, marriage functions in two functions: 1. The regulation of personal sex relations. 2. The regulation of descent inheritance, succession, and social order, this being its older and original function. The family which grows out of marriage is itself a stabilizer of the marriage institution, together with the property mores. Other potent factors in the marriage stability are pride, vanity, chivalry, duty, and religious convictions. But while marriages may be approved or disapproved on high, they are hardly made in heaven. The human family is a distinctly human institution. Evolutionary development. Marriage is an institution of society, not a department of the church. True religion should mightily influence it, but should not undertake exclusively to control or regulate it. Primitive marriage is primarily industrial, and even in modern times it is often a social or business affair. The influence of the mixture of the Edenite stock, and as a result the mores of advancing civilization, marriage is slowly becoming mutual, romantic, parental, poetical, affectionate, ethical, and even idealistic. Selection and so-called romantic love, however, were at a minimum of a primitive mating. During early times, husband and wife were not much together. They did not even eat together very often, but among the ancients, personal affection was not strongly linked to sex attraction. They became fond of one another, largely because of living and working together. Courtship and betrothal. Primitive marriages were always planned by the parents of the boy and the girl. The transition stage between the custom and the times of a free choosing was occupied by the marriage broker, or professional matchmaker. These matchmakers were at first the barbers, later the priests. Marriage was originally a group affair, then a family matter, or recently has it become an individual adventure. Coercion, not attraction, was the approach to primitive marriage. In early times, women had no sex aloofness, only sex inferiority, as inculcated by the mores. As raiding preceded trading, so marriage by capture preceded marriage by contract. Some women would connive at capture in order to escape the domination of the older men of the tribe. They preferred to fall in the hands of the men of their own age from another tribe. The pseudo-elopement was the transition stage between the capture by force and the subsequent courtship by charming. An early type of wedding ceremony was the mimic flight, a sort of elopement rehearsal, which was once a common practice. Later, mock capture became a part of the regular wedding ceremony. A modern girl's pretensions to resist capture, to be reticent towards marriage, are all the relics of olden customs. The carrying of the bride over the threshold is reminiscent of the days of the ancient practices, among others of the days of wife-stealing. Woman was long denied full freedom of self-disposal in marriage, but the more intelligent women have always been able to circumvent the restriction by the clever exercise of their wits. Men are usually taking the lead in courtship, but not always. Women sometimes formally as well as covertly initiates marriage, and the civilization has progressed. Women have had an increasing part in all phases of courtship and marriage. Increasing love, romance, and personal selection in premarital courtship are an erudite contribution to world races. The relations between the sexes are evolving favorably. Many advancing people are gradually substituting somewhat idealized concepts of sex attraction for those older motives of utility and ownership. Sex impulse and the feeling of affection are beginning to displace cold calculation in the choosing of life partners. The betrothal was originally equivalent to marriage, and among early peoples, sex relations were conventional during the engagement. In recent times, religion has established a sex taboo on the period between betrothal and marriage. Purchase and dowry. The ancients mistrusted love and promises. They thought that abiding unions must be guaranteed by some tangible security property. For this reason, the purchase price of the wife was regarded as a forfeit, or deposit which the husband was doomed to lose in case of the divorce or desertion. Once the purchase price of a bride had been paid, many tribes permitted the husband's brand to be burned upon her. Africans still buy their wives. A love wife, or a white man's wife, they compared to a cat because she costs nothing. The bride chose her occasions for dressing up and decorating daughters for public exhibition, with the idea of their bringing higher prices as wives. But they were not sold as animals. Among the later tribes, such as wife was not transferable, neither was her purchase, always just a cold-blooded money transaction. Service was equivalent to cash in the purchase of a wife. If an otherwise a desirable man could not pay for his wife, he could be adopted as a son by the girl's father, and then couldn't marry. If a poor man sought a wife and could not meet the price demanded by a grasping father, the elders would often bring pressure to bear upon the father, which would result in a modification of demands, or else there might be an elopement. As civilization progressed, fathers did not like to appear to sell daughters, and so while continuing to accept the bride's purchase price, they initiated the customs of giving the pair valuable presents, which about equaled the purchase money. And upon the later discontinuance of payment for the bride, these presents became the bride's dowry. The idea of a dowry was to convey the impression of the bride's independence, to suggest far removal from the times of a slave wives, and property companions. A man could not divorce a dowered wife without paying back the dowry in full. Among some tribes, a mutual deposit was made with the parents of both bride and groom, to be forfeited in case either deserted the other. In reality, a marriage bond during the period of transition from purchase to dowry. If the wife were purchased, the children belonged to the father. If not, they belonged to the wife's family. The wedding ceremony. The wedding ceremony grew out of the fact that marriage was originally a community affair, not just the culmination of the decision of two individuals. Mating was of group concern, as well as personal function. Magic ritual and ceremony surrounded the entire life of the ancients, and the marriage was no exception. As civilization advanced, as marriage became more seriously regarded, the wedding ceremony became increasingly pretentious. Early marriage was a factor in property interests, even as it is today, therefore required a legal ceremony, while the social status of the subsequent children demanded the widest possible publicity. Primitive man had no records, therefore must the marriage ceremony be witnessed by many persons. First, the wedding ceremony was more on the order of a betrothal, consisted only in public notification of intention of living together. Later, it consisted in formal eating together. Among some tribes, the parents simply took their daughter to the husband. In our cases, the only ceremony was the formal exchange of presents. After that, the bride's father would present her to the groom. Among many Levantine peoples, it was the custom to dispense with all formality, marriage being consummated by sexual relations. The red man was first to develop the more elaborate celebrations of weddings. Childlessness was greatly dreaded, and since barrenness was attributed to spirit machinations, efforts to ensure fecundity also led to the association of marriage with certain magical or religious ceremonies. And in this effort to ensure a happy and fertile marriage, many charms were employed. Even the astrologers were consulted to ascertain the birth of the stars of the contracting parties. At one time, the human sacrifice was a regular feature of all weddings among well-to-do people. Lucky days were sought out, Thursday being most favorably regarded. The weddings celebrated at the full of the moon were thought to be exceptionally fortunate. It was the custom of many Near Eastern peoples to throw grain upon the newlyweds. It was a magical rite, which was supposed to ensure fecundity. Certain Oriental people used rice for this purpose. Fire and water were always considered the best means of resisting ghosts and evil spirits. Hence, altar fires and lighted candles, as well as the baptismal sprinklings of holy water, were usually in evidence at weddings. For a long time, it was customary to set a false wedding day, and then suddenly postpone the event so as to put the ghosts and spirits off the track. The teasing of the newlyweds and the pranks preyed upon the honeymooners, all relics those far distant days when it was thought best to appear miserable and ill at ease in the sight of the spirits, so as to avoid arousing their envy. The wearing of the bridal veil is a relic of the times when it was considered necessary to disguise the bride, so that ghosts may not recognize her, and also to hide her beauty from the gaze of the otherwise jealous and envious spirits. The bride's feet were never touched the ground just prior to the ceremony. Even in the 20th century, it is still customary under Christian mores to stretch carpets from the carriage landing to the church altar. One of the most ancient forms of the wedding ceremony was to have a priest bless the wedding bed to ensure the fertility of the union. This was done long before any formal wedding ritual was established. During this period in the evolution of the marriage mores, the wedding guests were expected to file through the bedchamber at night, thus constituting legal witness to the consummation of marriage. The lucky element that, in spite of all premarital tests, certain marriages turned out bad, led primitive man to seek an insurance protection against marriage failure, led him to go in quest of priests and magic, and this movement culminated directly in modern church weddings. But for a long time, marriage was generally recognized as consisting in the decisions of the contracting parents. Later of the pair, while in the last 500 years, church and state have assumed jurisdiction and now presume to make pronouncements of marriage. Plural marriages. In the early history of marriage, the unmarried women belonged to the men of the tribe. Later on, a woman had only one husband at a time. The practice of one man at a time was the first step away from the promiscuity of the herd. While a woman was allowed but one man, her husband could sever such temporary relationships at will. These loosely regulated associations were the first step towards living pairwise in distinction to herdwise. In this stage of marriage development, children usually belong to the mother. The next step in mating evolution was the group marriage. The communal phase of the marriage had to intervene in the unfolding of the family life because the marriage mores were not strong enough to make pair associations permanent. The brother and sister marriages belonged to this group. 5 brothers of one family would marry 5 sisters of another. All over the world, the looser forms of communal marriage gradually evolved into various types of group marriage. And these group associations were largely regulated by the totem mores. Family life slowly and surely developed because sex and marriage regulation favored the survival of the tribe itself by ensuring the survival of larger numbers of children. Group marriages gradually gave way before the emerging practices of polygamy, polygyny, and polyandry. Among the more advanced tribes, polyandry was never general, being usually limited to queens and rich women. Furthermore, it was customarily a family affair, one wife for several brothers. Caste and economic restrictions sometimes made it necessary for several men to content themselves with one wife. Even then, the woman would marry only one, the others being loosely tolerated as uncles of the joint progeny. The Jewish custom requiring that a man consort with his deceased brother's widow for the purpose of raising up seed with his brother was the custom of more than half the ancient world. This was a relic of the time when marriage was a family affair rather than an individual association. The institution of polygamy recognized at various times four sorts of wives. 1. The ceremonial or legal wives. 2. The wives of affection and permission, concubines, contractual wives. Number 3. 4. Slave wives. True polygamy, where all the wives are of the equal status and all the children equal, has been very rare. Usually, even with plural marriages, the home was dominated by the head wife, the status companion. She alone had the ritual wedding ceremony, and only the children of such a purchase of dowered spouse could inherit such a special arrangement with the status wife. The status wife was not necessarily the love wife. In early times, she usually was not the love wife or sweetheart, did not appear until the races were considerably advanced, more particularly after the blending of the evolutionary tribes with the Nodites and Adamites. The taboo wife, one wife, of legal status, created the concubine mores. Under these mores, a man might have only one wife, but he could maintain sex relations with a number of concubines. Concubinage was the stepping stone to monogamy, the first move away from frank polygamy. The concubines of the Jews, Romans, and Chinese were very frequently the handmaids of the wife. Later on, as among the Jews, the legal wife was looked upon as the mother of all children born to the husband. The olden taboos on sex relations with a pregnant or nursing wife tended greatly to foster polygamy. Primitive women aged very early because of frequent childbearing coupled with hard work. Such overburdened wives only managed to exist by virtue of the fact that they were put in isolation 1 week out of each month when they were not heavy with children. Such a wife often grew tired of bearing children and requested her husband to take a second and younger wife, when able to help with both childbearing and domestic work. The new wife were therefore usually hailed with delight by the older spouses. There existed nothing on the order of sex jealousy. The number of wives were only limited by the ability of the man to provide for them. Wealthy and able men wanted large numbers of children, since the infant mortality was very high. It required an assembly of wives to recruit a large family. Many of these plural wives were mere laborers, slave wives. Human customs evolved, but very slowly. The purpose of a harem was to build up a strong and numerous body of blood kin for the support of the throne. A certain chief was once convinced that he could not have a harem, that he should be contented with one wife, so he promptly dismissed his harem. The dissatisfied wives went to their homes, and the offended relatives swept down on the chief in wrath, and did away with him then and there. True monogamy, pair marriage. Monogamy is monopoly. It is good for those who attain this desirable state, but it tends to work a biological hardship on those that are not so fortunate. But quite regardless of the effect of the individual, monogamy is decidedly best for the children. The earliest monogamy was due to the force of circumstances. Poverty. Monogamy is cultural and societal, artificial, and unnatural. It is unnatural to evolutionary man. It is wholly natural to the purer Nodites and Adamites, and has been of great cultural value to all advanced races. The Chaldean tribes recognized the right of a wife to impose a premarital pledge upon her spouse not to take a second wife or concubine. Both the Greeks and the Romans favored monogamous marriage. Ancestor worship has always fostered monogamy, as has the Christian era of regarding marriage as a sacrament. Even the elevation of the standard of living has consistently militated between plural wives. By the time of Michael's advent on Earth, practically all of the civilized world had attained the level of theoretical monogamy. But this passive monogamy did not mean that mankind had become habituated to the practice of real pair marriage. While pursuing the monogamic goals of the ideal pair marriage, which is, after all, something of a monopolistic sex association, society must not overlook the inviolable situation of those unfortunate men and women who failed to find a place in this new and improved social order, even when having done their best to cooperate with and enter into its requirements. Failure to gain mates in the social arena of competition may be due to insurmountable difficulties of multitudinous restrictions which the current mores have imposed. Truly, monogamy is ideal for those who are in, but it is mostly inevitably work great hardship on those who are left out in the cold of solitary existence. Always have the unfortunate few had to suffer. The majority might advance under the developing mores of evolving civilization, but always should the favored majority look with the kindness of consolidation on the less fortunate fellows who must pay the price of failure to attain membership in the ranks of those ideal sex partnerships which afford the satisfaction of all biologic urges, under the sanction of the highest mores of advancing social evolution. Monogamy always has been, now is, and forever will be the idealistic goal of human sex evolution. Ideal of true marriage entails self-denial. Therefore, does it so often fail just because one or both of the contracting parties are deficient in that acme of all human virtues, rugged self-control. Monogamy is the yardstick which measures the advance of social civilization as distinguished by purely biologic evolution. Monogamy is not necessarily biologic or natural, but is indispensable to the immediate maintenance and further development of social civilization. It contributes to the delicacy of sentiment, of refinement of moral character, and of spiritual growth, which is utterly impossible in polygamy. A woman never can become an ideal mother when she is all the while compelled to engage in a rivalry with her husband's affections. Pair marriage favors and fosters that intimate understanding and effective cooperation which is best for parental happiness, child welfare, and social efficiency. Marriage, which began in crude coercion, is gradually evolving into the magnificent institution of self-culture, self-control, self-expression, and self-perpetuation. The dissolution of wedlock. In the early evolution of the marital mores, marriage was a loose union that could be terminated at will. The children always follow the mother. The mother-child bond is instinctive and function regardless of the developmental stages of the mores. Among primitive peoples, only about one half the marriages proved satisfactory. The most frequent cause of separation was barrenness, which was always blamed on the wife, and the childless wives were believed to become snakes in the spirit world. Under the more primitive mores, divorce had the option of the man alone, and these standards have persisted to the 20th century among these people. As the mores evolved, certain tribes developed two forms of marriage: the ordinary, which permitted divorce, and the priest marriage, which did not allow for separation. The inauguration of wife purchase and wife dowry, by introducing a property penalty for marriage failure, did much to lessen separation, and indeed, many modern unions have stabilized by this ancient property factor. The social pressure of community standing the property privileges have always been the potent in the maintenance of the marriage, taboos, and mores. Down through the ages, marriage has made steady progress and stands on the advanced ground in the modern world. Notwithstanding, it is threateningly assailed by the widespread dissatisfaction among those people who were individual choice. A new liberty figures most largely, while these upheavals of adjustment appear among the more progressive races as a result of suddenly accelerated social evolution. Among the less advanced people, marriages continue to thrive and slowly improve under the guidance of the older mores. The new and sudden substitution of the more ideal but extremely individualistic love motives in marriage for the older and long-established property motive has unavoidably caused the marriage institution to become temporarily unstable. Man's marriage motives have always far transcended actual marriage morals. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the Occidental ideal of marriage is suddenly far outrun the self-centered, but partially controlled sex impulses of the races. The presence of large numbers of unmarried persons in any society indicate the temporary breakdown of the transition of the mores. The real test of marriage, all down for the ages, has been that continuous intimacy which is inescapable in all family life. Too pampered and spoiled youths, educated to expect every indulgence and full gratification of vanity and ego, can hardly hope to make a great success of marriage and home building. A lifelong partnership of self-effacement, comprised devotion and unselfish dedication to child culture. The high degree of imagination and fantastic romance entering into courtship is largely responsible for the increasing divorce tendencies among modern Occidental peoples, all of which is further complicated by women's greater personal freedom and increased economic liberty. Easy divorce, when the result of lack of self-control or failure of normal personality adjustment, only leads directly back to those crude societal stages for which man has emerged so recently as the result of so much personal anguish and racial suffering. But so long as society fails to properly educate children and youth, as long as the social order fails to provide adequate premarital training, and so long as unwise and immature youthful idealism is to be the arbiter of the entrance upon marriage, just so long will divorce remain prevalent. And insofar as the social group falls short of providing marriage, preparation for use to that extent must divorce function as the society safety valve which prevents still worse situations during the ages of rapid growth of the evolving mores. The ancients seem to have regarded marriage just about as seriously as some of the present-day people do, and it does not appear that many of the hasty and unsuccessful marriages of modern times are much of an improvement over the ancient practices of qualifying young men and women for mating. The great inconsistency of modern society is to exalt love and idealize marriage, while disapproving the full examination of both. The idealization of marriage. Marriage, which culminates in the home, is indeed man's most exalted institution, but it is essentially human. It should never have been called a sacrament. The Sephite priests made marriage a religious ritual, but for thousands of years after Eden, mating continued as purely social and civil institution. The likening of human associations to divine associations is most unfortunate. The union of husband and wife in the marriage-home relationship is a material function of the mortals of the evolutionary worlds. True indeed, much the spiritual progress may accrue consequent upon the sincere human efforts of husband and wife to progress, but this does not mean that marriage is necessarily sacred. Spiritual progress is attendant upon sincere application to other avenues of human endeavor. Neither can marriage be truly compared to the relation of the adjuster to man, nor to the fraternity of Christ Michael and his human brethren. At scarcely any point are such relationships comparable to the association of husband and wife, and it is most unfortunate that the human misconception of these relationships have produced so much confusion as to the status of marriage. It is also unfortunate that certain groups of mortals have conceived of marriage as being consummated by divine action. Such beliefs lead directly to the concept of the dissolubility of the marital state, regardless of the circumstances or wishes of the contracting parties. But the very fact of marriage dissolution itself indicates that deity is not a conjoining party to such unions. If God has once joined any two things or persons together, they will remain thus joined until such a time as the divine will decree their separation. But regarding marriage, which is a human institution, who shall presume to sit in judgment to say which marriages are unions that might be approved by the universe supervisors, in contrast with those which are purely human in nature and origin? Nevertheless, there is an ideal of marriage on the spheres on high, on the capital of each local system. The material sons and daughters of God do portray the height of the ideals of the union of man and woman and the bonds of marriage, and for the purpose of procreating and rearing offspring. After all, the ideal mortal marriage is humanely sacred. Marriage always has been and still is man's supreme dream, a temporal ideality, though the beautiful dream is seldom realized in its entirety. It endures as a glorious ideal, ever luring progressing mankind on to greater strivings for human happiness. But young men and women should be taught something of the realities of marriage before they are plunged into the exacting demands of interassociations of family life. Youthful idealization should be tempered with some degree of premarital disillusionment. The youthful idealization of marriage should not, however, be discouraged. Such dreams are the visualization of the future goals of family life. The attitude of both stimulating and helpful, providing it does not produce an insensitivity to the realization of the practical and commonplace requirements of marriage and subsequent family life. The ideals of marriage have made great progress in recent times among some peoples. Women enjoy practically equal rights with her consort. In concept, at least, the family is becoming a loyal partnership for rearing offspring and accompanied by sexual fidelity. But even this newer version of marriage need not presume to swing so far to the extreme as to confer mutual monopoly of all personality and individuality. Marriage is not just an individualistic idea, it is an evolving social partnership of a man and a woman, existing, functioning under the current mores, restricted by the taboos and enforced by the laws and regulation of society. 20th century marriages stand high in comparison to those of past ages. Notwithstanding, the home institution is now undergoing a serious testing because of the problems so suddenly thrust upon the social organization of the precipitate augmentation of the woman's liberties, rights so long denied to her, and the tardy evolution of the mores of past generations.